1 foot in the Quixotic Stirrup. I wrote in the Tower of Miraglin, my very first computer game on the Apple IIgs. Stories are remembered long after the facts are forgotten. That message has stuck with me for my entire life. It is as fundamental to me as don't fret about making the right decision, make your decision right. In my mind's eye, I see myself in my last bastion of sanity wanting to maximize my life and live to my fullest potential and happiness, no matter how hard that is for me. I imagine others might see my freedom as eccentric, if not even alarming now. But I fantasize of quixotic adventures in my end days, as Alonso Quijana that Cervantes wrote of, as he did, becoming and potentially ending my own days as Don Quixote, a fantasy knight of my own creation. Yeah, it's a bunch of crazy stuff, but it's how I feel, it's how I fantasize. Like Cervantes' Quixote, I hope my tale, here in hell difficulty, may shape some hearts and minds for centuries to come. That would be an accomplishment for me. Hell Difficulty's Richard aspires to become and live the stories that gave him hope and strength to endure and overcome his many hardships in life ever since he was born. He hopes to forget his past and forge new stories going forward where he is heroic and knightly in all things good and righteous, so he can overcome the evil that has sent him so many woes, the evil that was sent against him to crush his ideals. Richard dreams of living a life where he pursues and acts out the things that he imagined a knight would do, where he dropped out of heaven like a fallen angel into his old age in this modern cesspool of a world. Richard's faith, fantasy, and reality are all coming together, colliding as supernatural forces assault him in his storied reality. Storied reality is the name I use for Richard's world, where his degenerating mind has gradually and progressively blurred his fantasy with his reality, such that his stories are infused with reality. And yet Richard presents well, as doctors call it, and remains insanely intelligent and very articulate. He masks his mental degeneration and dementia, his madness, so well that people think him only a bit odd, maybe eccentric. People see Richard as wise and a person to admire. He's charming. They would follow him should the need arise. Richard is a natural leader, and people gravitate towards him, regardless of his new and strange idiosyncrasies and quirks. They have somehow only made him more approachable, and maybe a martyr for a cause. Much like Cervantes' Alonso Quijana's brains dried up for him to become Don Quixote, so did Richard suffer neurodegeneration, drying his brains up, that would effectively leave him gradually atrophying into deeper and deeper dementia. But Richard was, and still is, extremely intelligent. Even being neurodegenerative compromise, he outthinks most people. But his logic is now based on misinformation or exaggerations. And so sometimes he can make faulty decisions despite still being brilliant. And so, Richard finally threw himself into his dementia so that he could live his last months, maybe years, alive and adventuring, even if they were misadventuring. Rather than just remaining home and awaiting his final days isolated and having done nothing whatsoever with his remaining time, he questioned what's the point in that? I find the moment a lost memory resurfaces that my conscious mind is so distressed about the clear broken functionality. It seems to apply some kind of subconscious erosion to my personal pride, my confidence, my identity. That epileptic emotion spreads like wildfire in my brain. that a generation is more than just cognition and faculties, but of trust in yourself and your own perception of the world around you. Everything that was simple becomes hard. Everything becomes scary. It's difficult to navigate. It's hard to simply even exist. Life becomes an overwhelming implosion of stuff. It just keeps coming at you, threatening you, eating at you from within. It assaults your psyche, confounds the conscious and the subconscious, so you're floating about all inside. This is my madness. This is crazy anxiety. This is emotional lability. This is stuff I don't understand. Thankfully, the emotional epilepsy, as described, starts at a trigger event. It amplifies into that PBA explosion of crying, fatigue, and weakness. There are also sometimes PBA aftershocks for minutes, even hours, where I can despair, revert to crying. Honestly, sometimes it makes me feel so awful. My brain's broken. I don't know what happens. I start thinking it's better to be gone than here, and I ideate about suicide. That's the truth. But it passes. I never really wanted to do that. It was only in that emotional epileptic crazy. And I'm glad that I resist in those lamentation urges, or who knows what would have happened if I used those dark thoughts to escape. I am sure the doom would follow. But fortunately, my brain is strong enough to know this too shall pass. I have felt medical professionals, though, have refused to recognize my suffering, some even suggesting that I was imagining things. It was all in my head. I'm just depressed. They always just offered antidepressants and said, go away. Well, my sister did that and she died from a stroke. They were wrong. I developed a strong resentment towards dismissive doctors and nurses. Some doctors would say, come back when things get worse. After all, nothing we can do right now. No compassion, no understanding. I had resentment. Instead of receiving doctor care and attention, I received insurance, bureaucracy, lies, misdirection, crazy, unjustified, expensive bills that were not going to be covered by insurance, even though they previously approved them, and demanding through collections that are wrong that I am, of course, a terrible person. I'm not paying my bills. They text me, they call me, they harangue me, they leave messages, all despite it being wrong. And the hospital ultimately confesses and doctors that they're right. I don't owe them money, but somehow the collectors keep coming. It just seemed to me that everything was designed to go against me and very little designed to go for me. It just doesn't matter how much you try to stop this stuff, it just keeps coming. You know, I suppose you could view this bureaucracy as just hell on earth. I mean, it's just normal, I guess. Anyway, all the while, I could no longer work with how bad things had become. You can imagine from everything I've described. And no one cared. I could no longer drive. I could no longer work. I can't even go shopping without someone else because I might get lost, confused, or get arguing with somebody. Things had just become bad. I couldn't do anything anymore on my own, it felt like. I was so angry. I was so resentful, though. I ultimately found myself thinking, well, gee, if I hate these people so much, is it possible that I would ever, if my brain got worse off, do something actually? Would I ever inflict harm on someone because I really was that resentful? You know, you can hate someone or be angry and resentful, but your intelligent and your rational and your civilized side says, yeah, whatever, dismiss that. But when you start degenerating, some of that natural resistance kind of goes away. So the very thought to me that I could conceive hurting someone, since I never would want to be that way, and I did own an assault rifle and pistol, I was quite good at it. I'd grown up with weapons, I was very competent. But I worried with those PBA episodes and that emotional epilepsy, would I seek a weapon even to turn on myself, much less someone else? I was so upset, so resentful, so often, that I finally decided, you know, I better be careful. I don't know if I trust the supervisor in my mind anymore to do the right thing, so I gave my assault rifle, an AR-15, and my pistol, a Glock 40, to my daughter and all the ammunition. Supportively, she took the weapons and she properly registered them with her local, state, and even the federal agencies. She was very, very responsible. Sometimes I think too responsible, but that's my daughter. Super responsible. No amount of planning or mitigation can help with losing who you are. You do not know how long you have or how long you will remember enough to be yourself and have the cognition to communicate what you can even recall to someone else. And so I have begun to write my experiences and my memories as they come to me, and will share them as they bring us to the present and beyond into the quixotic, fantastical adventure of Hell Difficulty's Richard, which again is entirely not the real world Richard, me. Beyond sharing my life's journey in an entertaining form, I hope to inspire people to embrace that evil and good exist, and it is what we do that defines us. In conclusion, I have been diagnosed with a neurodegenerative disease, something that has been eroding my very identity without me knowing it for over a decade. By the time it was recognized, it was hard to recognize me anymore. Indeed, it had been serendipitously replacing me. In many ways, I see my mind and identity are suffering a nuke and pave experience where many of the things I think I am are being stripped from me, and the emerging me is not who I want to be. I wonder what will I become if this nuking continues. It makes me contemplate even greater questions and things. What happens when things beyond our control strike us, destroy things we love, or shatter our fundamental beliefs? What happens when our parents, in the name of doing good, hurt us repeatedly? What happens when those who love us forget about us, even abandon us? What happens when wickedness besets its claws into us? What happens when our very minds degenerate and reality begins to slip away? What happens when you are more alone than you were at birth? What happens? There are many hardships in life, and when one's sanity is adrift, it becomes difficult to know where life's story is fiction and where it is fact. I sincerely believe many facts and truths in Hell Difficulty will be perceived as fiction, and that is okay. My life has been and remains epic, truly legendary by most people's standards, even if it is through the challenges of Hell Difficulty. Hell Difficulty's Richard blends my history with his fiction, focusing on his interactions with psychiatrists and life after his diagnosis of neurodegenerative disorder, frontal-lobe temporal dementia, FTD, with memory, aphasia, neuropathy, and bipolar disorders. Richard's world suffered a great reset after a heroic event where he saved 2 seniors from a mugging and probably their lives. But it was twisted into a life-shattering moment where he was cast as a racist murderer of a poor black assailant instead of being the savior of those seniors. This may be the final story for Richard, should he fail to convince his captors that he merits freedom and independence. Hell Difficulty sets out to blur the lines between fact and fiction through Richard's degenerating mind while showcasing societal reactions to his madness and his sense of righteousness. So please enjoy Hell Difficulty, and please share with your friends and colleagues whatever you have gleaned from it. Thank you. Richard Seaborn, The Fulcrum.